Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The sun had long faded beneath a thick shroud of ominous clouds, casting a perpetual twilight over the kingdom of Eldoria. The people whispered of ancient prophecies and dark omens, their fears growing with each passing day as the once peaceful land began to descend into despair. The shadows grew longer, and in those shadows, a name was spoken in hushed tones: Malachar, the dark sorcerer, whose malevolence had been vanquished centuries ago by the great hero Arthur. Yet now, it seemed the dark forces were stirring once more, and with them came the threat of annihilation. Karl stood at the edge of the forest, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, a simple yet sturdy blade that had seen him through many battles. He was young, barely in his 20s, with a lean, muscular build and the hardened expression of one who had seen more than his fair share of hardship. His dark hair fell over his eyes as he scanned the forest ahead, a dense and foreboding expanse known as the Haunted Forest. It was said that the dead walked these woods, bound to Malachar's will, and that no one who entered ever returned. But Karl was no stranger to danger. Orphaned at a young age, he had been taken in by the Knights of Eldoria, raised to fight, and fueled by a burning desire for justice. His parents had been slain by Malachar's forces when he was just a boy, a memory that haunted him every waking moment. Now, as he stood on the precipice of a journey that could determine the fate of the world, he felt that familiar fire of resolve ignite within him. He had overheard the secret council meeting where King Eldwin had revealed the ancient legend of the Star Sword, a weapon forged from a fallen star and blessed by the gods to vanquish all evil. It was the very sword that Arthur had wielded to defeat Malachar in ancient times, and it was said to possess the power to cut through any darkness. The council had been skeptical, doubting the existence of such a weapon, but Karl had believed. He had felt a sense of destiny, a calling that had driven him to volunteer for the perilous quest to find the Star Sword. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers both seen and unseen, but Karl knew he had no choice. The darkness was spreading, and if Malachar was truly returning, the only hope for Eldoria, and perhaps the world, was the Star Sword. With a deep breath, Karl stepped into the forest, the thick canopy above quickly obscuring the last remnants of daylight. The air grew colder, the silence oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. Karl's senses were on high alert, his hand never straying far from his sword. He knew the stories of the haunted forest, of the spirits that roamed the woods, and of the dark magic that permeated every inch of the land. As he ventured deeper, the trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The path ahead was barely visible, shrouded in mist and shadow, but Karl pressed on, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had to reach the celestial mountain, where the Star Sword was said to be hidden. But first, he had to survive the forest. The first sign of danger came in the form of a faint whisper, carried on the wind. Karl paused, his heart pounding in his chest as he strained to listen. The whisper grew louder, a chorus of voices, each one filled with malice and despair. He drew his sword, the blade glinting faintly in the dim light, and turned in a slow circle, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The voices grew closer, more distinct, and then, without warning, the ground beneath Karl's feet began to tremble. He staggered, barely keeping his balance as the earth cracked and split, and from the fissures emerged a group of figures, their forms twisted and grotesque. They were the undead, warriors long dead but now reanimated by dark magic, their hollow eyes glowing with an eerie light. Karl's grip tightened on his sword as he prepared for battle. The undead warriors advanced slowly, their movements jerky and unnatural, but their intent clear. They were bound to Malachar's will, and their purpose was to destroy anyone who dared to oppose their master. The first of the undead lunged at Karl with a guttural snarl, its rusted sword slicing through the air. Karl parried the blow, the clash of metal ringing out through the forest, and countered with a swift strike to the creature's midsection. The blade cut through the decaying flesh with ease, but the undead warrior barely flinched, its lifeless form driven only by the dark magic that animated it. Karl fought with all the skill and strength he possessed, but the undead were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. For every one he cut down, another took its place, their bony hands grasping and clawing at him. He could feel his strength waning, the exhaustion setting in, and for a brief moment, he wondered if this was where his journey would end. But then, from the shadows, an arrow whistled through the air, striking one of the undead warriors square in the forehead. The creature collapsed instantly, the dark magic that had sustained it dissipating into the ether. Karl turned to see a figure emerge from the trees, a bow in hand and a quiver of arrows slung over her shoulder. She was tall and lithe, with long, flowing hair the color of midnight and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. "Looks like you could use some help," she said, her voice calm and confident. Karl nodded, grateful for the assistance. "I won't say no to that." The woman drew another arrow from her quiver and fired with deadly precision, taking down another of the undead. Together, she and Karl fought side by side, their movements synchronized as if they had been fighting together for years. With her help, the tide of the battle began to turn, and soon, the last of the undead fell to the ground, its body crumbling to dust. Karl sheathed his sword and turned to the woman, offering a grateful smile. "Thank you. I don't think I could have taken them all on my own." The woman nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You're welcome. My name is Luna. I'm a guardian of these woods." "Karl," he replied, extending a hand. "I'm on a journey to find the star sword. I don't suppose you've heard of it?" Luna's expression grew serious, and she nodded. "I have. The star sword is more than just a legend. It's real, and it's the only weapon that can stop Malakar. But finding it won't be easy. The path to the celestial mountain is treacherous, and the temple where the sword is kept is guarded by powerful magic." Karl's resolve only grew stronger. "I have to find it. It's the only way to save Eldoria." Luna studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then I'll help you. I have my own reasons for wanting to see Malakar defeated. My village was destroyed by his forces, and I've been fighting against him ever since. If the star sword is our only hope, then I'll do whatever it takes to help you find it." Together, they set off deeper into the forest, Luna leading the way with the ease of someone who knew the woods intimately. As they walked, she told Karl more about the dark forces that had begun to spread across the land, and about the ancient legends that spoke of the star sword's power. Karl listened intently, his mind racing with the enormity of the task ahead. The journey through the forest was long and arduous, but with Luna's guidance, they managed to avoid most of the dangers that lurked within the shadows. Still, the closer they got to the celestial mountain, the more oppressive the darkness became, as if the very air was thick with Malakar's malevolence. As they emerged from the forest, the celestial mountain loomed before them, its jagged peaks piercing the sky. The mountain was shrouded in mist, and the path that led to its summit was steep and treacherous. But Karl felt a sense of determination settle over him. This was the final stretch, the last leg of his journey. He would not falter now. The climb was grueling, the air growing thinner and colder with each step. The path was narrow, with sheer drops on either side, and the wind howled through the peaks, threatening to knock them off balance. But Karl and Luna pressed on, their eyes fixed on the summit. It was during one of the coldest nights, as they huddled together for warmth in a small cave, that they were joined by a third traveler. He appeared out of the mist, an old man with a long white beard and a twinkle in his eye. He carried a staff, and his robes were adorned with symbols of the stars and the moon. "Greetings, travelers," the old man said, his voice warm and kind. "I am Eldon, a wizard of the old ways. I couldn't help but notice you're on a rather dangerous journey." Carl and Luna exchanged a glance, then Carl spoke. "We're looking for the star sword. Do you know of it?" Eldon's eyes sparkled with recognition. "Ah, the star sword. Yes, I know of it. I was once a servant in King Arthur's court, long ago. The sword is indeed real, and it is the only weapon that can defeat Malakar. But finding it is only the first step. Wielding it requires great strength and an even greater heart." "Then you'll help us?" Luna asked, hope in her voice. Eldon nodded. "I will. The path ahead is fraught with danger, but with my guidance, I believe we can reach the Temple of Stars and retrieve the sword." And so, with Eldon as their guide, the trio continued their ascent. The journey was not without its perils: avalanche-prone slopes, fierce winds, and the ever-present shadow beasts that seemed to lurk around every corner. These creatures were unlike anything Carl had ever faced before, beings of pure darkness that could only be harmed by light-based magic. Eldon, with his vast knowledge, began to teach Carl the basics of light magic, and under his guidance, Carl discovered a latent ability within himself that he had never known existed. As Carl practiced his magic, he felt a growing confidence within him, but with it came the weight of responsibility. This journey was about more than just retrieving a sword, it was about saving the world from darkness. Luna, ever supportive, reminded him of the importance of teamwork and trust. She had been alone in her fight against Malakar for so long, but now, with Carl and Eldon by her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Eldon, too, shared his wisdom, telling them of the spiritual journey they were on. The path to the star sword was not just physical, it was a test of their very souls. Carl, Luna, and Eldon each had their own inner darkness to confront, and only by overcoming it could they hope to succeed. Days turned into weeks as they made their way up the mountain, the air growing ever thinner and the cold more biting. But at last, they reached the summit, where the Temple of Stars awaited them. The temple was a magnificent structure, its walls adorned with carvings of constellations and ancient runes. But the temple was also a place of trials, designed to test the worthiness of those who sought the star sword. As they entered the temple, Carl felt a strange sensation wash over him, as if the very air was charged with magic. The first chamber they entered was vast and empty, save for a single pedestal in the center, upon which rested a glowing crystal. Eldon explained that the temple was filled with illusions and traps, each one a test of courage, wisdom, and heart. Carl approached the crystal cautiously, but as he reached out to touch it, the room around him suddenly shifted, and he found himself standing in a place that was all too familiar, the ruins of his childhood home. The sky was dark, the air thick with smoke, and the sound of battle echoed in the distance. Carl's heart pounded in his chest as he realized where he was. This was the night his parents had been killed. In the distance, he saw a figure, his younger self, hiding in the ruins, terrified and alone. And then, there were the sounds of footsteps, heavy and ominous. The soldiers of Malakar's army were approaching, their dark armor glinting in the firelight. Carl knew what was about to happen. He had lived through it once before, and the memory had haunted him ever since, but this time, something was different. This time, Carl had a choice. He could intervene, save his younger self, and change the course of history. But as he watched the scene unfold, he realized that doing so would mean altering the past, and the consequences could be disastrous. Karl's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword as he fought against the overwhelming urge to save his younger self. He knew that he had to let events play out as they had, that he had to accept his past for what it was, no matter how painful. It was a test of his courage, of his ability to confront the darkest moments of his life without giving in to the desire to change them. As the soldiers advanced, Karl closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He let go of the fear, the anger, the guilt that had consumed him for so long. And in that moment, the illusion shattered, and he was back in the temple, standing before the pedestal. The crystal was gone, and in its place was a faint, warm light, a sign that he had passed the test. Luna and Eldon had their own trials to face. Luna found herself back in her village, the night it had been destroyed by Malakar's forces. She was forced to relive the moment when she had been unable to save her family, the guilt and pain overwhelming her. But just as Karl had done, Luna had to accept that there were things she couldn't change, that she had to forgive herself in order to move forward. Eldon's trial was one of wisdom. He found himself in the final battle against Malakar, the battle where Arthur had fallen. Eldon had always blamed himself for not being able to protect Arthur, for not being strong enough to defeat Malakar. But in this trial, he had to come to terms with the fact that even the greatest heroes had their limits, that sometimes, even the most powerful magic wasn't enough. It was a lesson in humility, in accepting that he couldn't change the past, but that he could still make a difference in the present. With each of them having faced their own trials and emerged stronger for it, they finally reached the final chamber of the temple. There, in the center of the room, was the star sword, resting on a pedestal made of celestial stone. The sword was a thing of beauty, its blade glowing with a light that seemed to come from the stars themselves. The hilt was intricately designed, with runes etched into the metal, and the blade itself was impossibly sharp, a weapon forged for a hero. Karl approached the sword, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been working towards, the culmination of his journey. He reached out, his hand closing around the hilt, and as he did, he felt a surge of power flow through him. The sword responded to his touch, glowing brighter as if acknowledging him as its new wielder, but before he could fully grasp the sword, a voice echoed through the chamber, cold and cruel. "So, you've finally made it." Karl spun around, his eyes narrowing as he saw a figure step out of the shadows. It was Malakar, his dark robes billowing around him like smoke. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a twisted smile played on his lips. "You really thought you could just take the star sword and defeat me?" Malakar sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing but a boy, a child playing at being a hero. Arthur was a fool, and you're even more foolish to think you can succeed where he failed." Karl tightened his grip on the sword, his resolve hardening. "I'm not Arthur," he said, his voice steady. "And you're not as powerful as you think." Malakar's smile faded, replaced by a snarl of anger. "You dare defy me? I am the darkness. I am the end of all things." With a flick of his hand, Malakar unleashed a wave of dark magic, the energy crackling through the air like a storm. But Karl was ready. He raised the star sword, and with a flash of light, he deflected the attack, the magic dissipating harmlessly. The battle was on. Malakar was a formidable opponent, his dark magic nearly overwhelming, but Karl had the power of the star sword on his side. The blade cut through Malakar's spells with ease, the light from the sword growing brighter with each strike. Luna and Eldon fought alongside him, Luna's arrows finding their mark with deadly precision, while Eldon's magic provided protection and support. But Malakar was not easily defeated. He conjured illusions, shadows that twisted and warped reality, trying to break Karl's resolve. He whispered lies, trying to sow doubt and fear in Karl's mind, but Karl remained steadfast. He had faced his own darkness, confronted his deepest fears, and he would not be swayed. The battle raged on, the temple shaking with the force of their clash. Karl could feel the weight of the sword in his hand, the power that it held, but he also knew that it was not just the sword that would determine the outcome. It was his heart, his belief in the light, in the goodness of humanity, that would make the difference. As the battle reached its climax, Malachar unleashed one final, desperate attack, a wave of dark energy that threatened to consume everything in its path. But Karl, with all the strength he had left, raised the star sword high, channeling all his light magic into the blade. The sword glowed with a brilliance that outshone the stars themselves, and with a single, powerful strike, Karl brought the blade down. The light from the sword cut through the darkness like a knife through shadow, piercing Malachar's dark shield and striking him at the very core. Malachar let out a scream, a sound of pure agony, as the darkness within him was torn apart, unraveling like a tapestry. And then, with a final burst of light, Malachar was gone, his form dissolving into nothingness. The darkness that had plagued the world finally vanquished. The temple began to collapse around them, the walls crumbling as the magic that had sustained it faded away. Karl, Luna, and Eldon ran for the exit, the ground shaking beneath their feet. They barely made it out in time, the temple collapsing behind them in a cloud of dust and debris. Outside, the sun was rising, the first rays of light breaking through the clouds that had darkened the sky for so long. The world was beginning to heal, the darkness retreating as the light returned. But the victory had come at a cost. Eldon, having used the last of his strength in the battle, was growing weaker by the moment. Karl and Luna knelt beside him, tears in their eyes as they realized what was happening. Eldon smiled at them, his eyes filled with peace. "It's all right," he said, his voice soft. "My time has come. But know this, I am proud of you both. You have done what no one else could. You have saved the world." With those words, Eldon closed his eyes, his body fading away as his spirit ascended to the stars, becoming one with the light. Karl and Luna watched as the last of the darkness disappeared, leaving only the light of a new dawn. They had done it. They had defeated Malachar and saved the world from darkness. But they knew that the fight was not truly over. There would always be darkness in the world, always be those who sought to harm and destroy. But as long as there were people like Karl and Luna, people who believed in the light, the world would never be lost to the darkness. They returned to Eldoria as heroes, their journey having come to an end. King Eldwin honored them with a grand celebration, and Karl placed the star sword in a new sanctuary, where it would remain until the world needed it again. But even as they celebrated, Karl couldn't help but look up at the stars, remembering the journey they had taken, the sacrifices they had made. He knew that the legend of the star sword would continue, that it would inspire future generations to stand against the darkness, just as it had inspired him. And so, as the stars twinkled above, Karl made a silent vow, that he would continue to fight for the light, for the hope of a better world. Because in the end, it was not the sword that made the hero, it was the heart, the belief in something greater than oneself. And that was a power that could never be defeated.